advocate on behalf of Reggie Clemons to prevent his execution, and that's to continue fighting for justice in the United States and wherever injustice exists. So I open it up for questions. And if you could speak up a bit. And
since his cousin was on the same bridge he was, and his cousin obviously knows who didn't do it, will he be allowed to testify at the hearing? And what will Amnesty International be doing other than sending out, I guess, alerts by email to get people down to the court? And will Reggie be allowed? So those are my three questions. Because I think if more vocal and physical people from the, all across the United States, or because that case, Troy's case, got national attention, and I feel like if there had been more people willing, to maybe take more of a stand, maybe Troy would be with us now. So I'm wondering what is Amnesty International going to do other than sending out alerts physically to be there to stop what's going to happen. They will execute this young man if there isn't some real attention paid to this case. Because basically this may be maybe the second time I'm hearing about it, and will Reggie be allowed to hear present for this case?
Yeah. And that hasn't been determined yet whether he will or not. Hopefully he will, because he's willing to come to the hearing and to testify. But I'm not sure if that's a decision that the judge has granted or not at this time. But it does definitely make a difference. I can say that June 17, 2009, when Reggie got a date, no one anticipated that he was going to get a date. That's how unfair that was. Not even his attorneys was aware of the fact that he was going to get him a date. In fact, we had an appeal in place against legal injection at that time. So it was a real rush job that they did. You could almost say like in the middle of the night. But Reggie wasn't aware of it. We weren't attorneys. Attorney wasn't aware of it when they took him over to the execution area. And we had like 30 days. We had gotten down to 12 days at that time. So there was a lot of public outcry, a lot of letter writing, calling the Attorney General's office, jamming the phone lines, the governor and all. And I do think they heard the voice of the people, because for years people felt that this case was very unfair, a lot of holes in the case, just not clear at all. They can't even tell you who supposedly killed who. The prosecutor, when he argued the case during the three different trials, he kept changing who was supposed to have killed someone. But yet still they were willing to execute 3 people without having real clear knowledge. So I would say, writing the governor at that time, when it became necessary for clemency, the other problem, potential problem we had, the individual that's the governor now of Missouri was also the prosecutor, Attorney General. I'm sorry, it was Attorney General at the time Reggie trial was going on, or over the years, for the past 20 years. He actually tried to get Reggie executed. In fact, he was the one that executed Marlon Gray, had him executed, made a public statement on TV that he was going to see that Reggie would get a date by December of that year, 2005. So my question is, how can a person, as a governor now, be fair and commune a sentence or do anything when he was one of the main persons trying to see he got executed? That's a question yet to be answered. So these some of the pending situations and some of the things in Reggie's case.
What about his cousin? How's his cousin? He was a witness to see that he didn't. How's he tied up in this?
Which cousin, huh? Tom Clemons?
The one
No,
that we
Richardson.
hanging out with that night.
Antonio Richardson.
Oh, you're talking about Reggie's cousin Antonio.
Mhm.
They just basically, well, actually, what happened was they ignored anything Tony said, and Tony was taken down to headquarters for interrogation. He was 16 years old. He was interrogated twice in homicide without an attorney, without his parents or anyone being present to defend him. And Tony was certified as an adult and given a death sentence. When really what he should have had was another trial. Or maybe not even, that should not have happened here.
And we're going to go to the questions in the back, and I'll keep a stack. But to just address your question in terms of how Amnesty organizes itself, particularly in terms of death penalty cases, it's really multi-layered, and it's really focused on building up the grassroots in terms of doing mobilizations. So it includes everything from, so the alerts that you mentioned is everything from the phone calls into particular offices within the state of Missouri, to letter writing campaigns, to a petition that we actually have signed, that folks can sign in the back, that we can collect and then send it to the appropriate folks in Missouri. In addition to that, there's also a legislative advocacy piece in terms of advocating for people on the Hill to also take a stand in certain cases, like Reggie's case. And there's a number of other different ways, particularly in terms of using the media to get the public to know more about these particular cases. For example, the Troy Davis case was a national, became national, it had the national attention, but it really took years of organizing. Some would say probably about a decade of organizing, and particularly in the last few years of Troy's life, really building up the momentum at the grassroots. And so what we're hoping to do is build up momentum in terms of Reggie's case. They're doing, it's been done for years because of the Thomases and other advocates in Missouri, and we're hoping that this could be the beginning of doing it here in New York City. And so I'm going to go to the question in the back. Yeah. And if you could stand up, if that's all right.
Thanks for this program. My name is Sherelle. I'm with Equal Justice USA. We're a national organization based here in Brooklyn. My question, you kind of already touched on us a bit, is how can we help Reggie while simultaneously doing the legislative work? Like, I know there's some bills currently being pushed in Maryland and Connecticut, so how can we in New York help with those cases while also helping with Reggie's simultaneously? What kind of work can be done?
I can pass that off to Connie.
So I think that it's important to recognize what you're capable of and what your skills speak to. I think some folks are good at organizing events and educating folks. I think that getting into high schools and talking to them about the death penalty in general and particular cases in specific can be very helpful, because this is a long fight. Bishop Colley is going to be longer than it's already been. He's been down there for 20 years. The young people coming up should know about it and should be talking about it. I was just talking with Ms. Thomas about bills that are pending in Missouri right now. There's a Racial Justice Act bill that's pending to allow for race examination of prosecutorial decisions and jury selection decisions. People need to educate themselves about it and get active on it. You can write letters to the editor, you can write op-eds to your local paper, you can get on local radio stations. I think City College has a radio station, right? Mm-hmm. Y'all can get on it. I mean, I used to be a DJ when I was in college, and you can't unsay it. So once it's said, it's out there, and you got a big catchment area here in New York City. You can educate people in fell swoops around things like this. Have series of events, educate, spread the word about the petitions. And brainstorm with the people who are active with you now, what they want to do, what they think should be happening, because you don't want to stagnate as a movement, I think. Just some quick thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to bring to y'all attention an entirely new organization that is basically emerging out of, evolving out of a lot that has gone on in the past. It's called FACE, Families of America's Condemned in Power. FACE believes that the vanguard, the leadership of the death penalty movement should be the families of men and women who are sitting in death houses throughout this country. We also believe that the death penalty has a collateral damage that causes emotional, psychological, etc. Problems for families of men and women in the death house, and that is now a new approach to hopefully abolishing the death penalty, simply because the courts have ruled over and over and over again that the death penalty is not cruel and unusual for the defendant. However, if we can record and document the damage that it has caused the families, we believe that it can in fact be designated cruel and unusual. And we borrow a term from the military, which is called collateral damage. We have sign-up sheets. We also have a fact sheet, information sheet about the organization in the back. So please feel free to look at that. That's the whole new approach.
And yeah, if I could just, and then I'll hand it off to Pastor Thomas, in terms of absolutely what Tanya is saying, it's really based on whatever you can do. So it's everything from doing a public education or awareness event so that more people know who Reggie Clemons is, to getting people to sign petition signatures, to doing the letter to the editor, but then also to, if it's just writing a letter to Reggie so that he can receive it, where he is. It's really about doing anything and everything that you can do to support work that's already happening, whether it's Equal Justice USA or Amnesty International or the ACLU, the Reggie Clemons family. I just want to do a quick announcement on another way that you can help support. So Reggie, is a poet, and there's a book that his family and him has produced called Poetic Reflections that is on sale for $10 a piece. It's a good way to directly support him in his case. And you could just contact myself or the Thomases in case you'd like to purchase a book. Pastor Thomas?
Okay, I just wanted to piggyback on what the young man had to say, to understand the portent of the impact that the death penalty has on the family. The young man, Marlon Gray, that was executed, and by the state's own admission, he wasn't even there. But they executed him to close off the avenues of escape for the injustices that they had created. While he was in prison, his last year, his grandmother died, who used to go and see him once or twice a month. His mother died just before he was executed. 6 months after he was executed, his father died. The whole of the family was wiped out as they grieved themselves. And I think if you saw the latter part of that film where they were talking about Nels Moss, the dark-skinned, white-bearded old man was saying Nels Moss. And the family literally grieved themselves to death over a process that they thought worked. And we're part of that process, and we're here by the grace of God. It's been 20 years. My hair was black when this case happened. And it's only by the grace of God that we're still alive, because he has strengthened us to continue to fight, because we've got nerve enough to fight and verve enough to fight, and we're not quitters and we won't give up. But it definitely has an impact. There's an organization called Murder Victims Families that face a similar fate. They deal with the question of forgiveness. Even if a person has killed one of my family members, the greatest thing about it is getting healed through forgiveness, because otherwise there's never closure. And so I appreciate you and applaud your efforts in doing that. But it definitely has a serious impact. And my prayer every day is that my wife and I will live long enough to see Reginald exonerated. And if Reginald is exonerated, it's going to reverberate across the nation. They're going to talk about Clemons versus the United States Supreme Court. And a lot of folk, yellow, black, white, especially poor, are going to be set free because of these lying prosecutors.
we have a couple more questions? We'll go to you and then in the front. And if you can stand up. Yeah.
All right. My name's Kilo Vasquez. I go here. I was at BCC before too, by the way. I do work. I'm in the BSU, the Black Student Union here, and I also do work with Lassie, thanks to Felix Navarro, Leaders Against Systemic Injustice. This is an event about the death penalty specifically. My work necessarily isn't just there. A lot of it's encompassed through the whole prison industrial complex that has like plagued this nation, right? Of, you know, something that's fairly recent, something that's, you know, not just to like, you know, subjugated people, but also, you know, a means of social control. I don't need to go through the statistics. You know, Michelle Alexander has a book, The New Jim Crow, for that. But I mean, my question would be, I think Ms. Green, because in the ACLU, prosecutors have a motive, right, to like prosecute people because they get money out of it. How about, I mean, there was a recent report about all the judges, and, you know, not just, you know, judges, but also banks and other corporations, but judges specifically, and prosecutors that invest in private jails to lock people up, and, you know, they have actual stock in private jails. They have a lot of profit interest in locking up people that don't look like them in the prison industrial complex. So, what's your take on that?
One thing I think that it's important to remember, to keep in mind when we think, well, the lawyers are supposed to be fair and judges are supposed to be fair, they're supposed to be neutral arbiters. There's a direct line from many prosecutors' offices to judges' chambers in that most judges are former prosecutors, especially criminal court judges. And so aside from any financial gain, you know, a job or investments that return on, you know, private prisons or other kinds of prison industrial complex investments is a power return. So, you know, I've been a defense attorney my whole life. I have absolutely no interest in becoming a prosecutor. You know, we don't allow them in our house. But, but it is important to know that most of the people I went to law school, if they go into criminal law, it would be to be a prosecutor because of that power. They have that final word on not only death cases, but all cases and how they're going to be charged. So they stand in front of some guy who may or may not have done something, and they can make a decision about where he's going to go, what track he's going to take. And then as a judge, they sit in judgment. And I think you can't ignore the power factor to it. And for some, it's much stronger than others. I think also there is a real investment in the system as it stands. Because for a lot of people, certain skin color, majority, people who have money, it works. And they've seen it work. And when, you know, their nephew in the suburbs gets arrested for marijuana and doesn't even have to go to jail for it, you know, not even taken down to the police station, kind of gets a slap on the wrist, and the parents say, you know, you get him under control. They say, yeah, we'll put him in a program. That's the system working for them. Whereas for us in the neighborhood, you're going to jail for a long time, and it's nonsense. And so they have an investment that we can't ignore in the system working as it is because it functions for certain people. It's the same way kind of most of the systems in this country work for certain people who have real financial interest in it continuing as is. And us kind of coming up from the bottom, you know, coming from poverty, coming from dispossession, coming from alienation and powerlessness, really want it to work in the real way, the way it says on paper that it works, that the Constitution actually means something, that these rights that we're guaranteed all apply to all of us, and not just the folks who can pay for it.
My name's Sarah Loebman. Just one thing on this just made me think. The most graphic example I've ever had is I attended, probably 20 years ago, a trial of coal miners who'd been on strike who were framed up on murder charges in Kentucky. And the walls of the courthouse literally were lined with photographs of the judge and the prosecutors. I mean, that's what the decorations on the walls were. You know, it wasn't like a big deal. That's just what they were, which of course was a big deal. I thought the facts of this thing you gave us are very interesting, and some of the points you made. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about some of the federal legislation on the death penalty, because it's certainly been my impression that over the last 15 years or so, as other aspects of workers' rights have been restricted, the Patriot Act and other things like that, federal legislation shoring up aspects of the death penalty, even as several states maybe has increased. The 1994 Death Penalty Act that increased, I think, by 40 or 50 the number
63, I think.
63 the number of crimes you can be charged with. Somebody mentioned the effective death penalty, Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, which makes it much more difficult for people charged by states, which according to this, the vast majority of people charged under death penalty are charged by states, making it far more difficult for them to appeal into the federal system, which often is the best chance you're going to get. Anyway, I was wondering if you would comment on some of those
Right, the
things.
federal system used to be the best chance because there were judges there that were appointed for life, not political appointees, not there for pay, but they had guaranteed jobs so they could actually neutrally determine what was right and what was wrong. Federal judge appointments became far more politicized with the first Bush, Reagan and Bush, and we have that legacy now with these judges having the majority. I don't know offhand, but a lot of the cases that then come out of state courts and into federal court to be assessed on habeas review are coming before judges that aren't the 1960s, early 70s judges, but they're the 80s and 90s judges, which are not going to be friendly to criminal defendants for the most part. You asked about federal legislation, and I have to say there hasn't really, since the ADPA got passed by Clinton, got signed by Clinton, our friend, institutionalized, right, like our friend.
Who rushed him during his campaign.
Right, for the execution of a retarded man, right, to make sure, Ricky Ray Rector in Arkansas was being executed during Clinton's campaign, and he went home to make sure he was there on duty when Mr. Rector was electrocuted. Mr. Rector got his final meal and saved his dessert for after the execution so that he could come and get it, because that's where he was at. You know what I mean? And that's who Clinton deemed necessary to execute. So anyway, so Clinton signed this law that has had such far-reaching effect that they really haven't had to pass very much else to destroy a lot of the habeas rights that criminal defendants had. What has been happening, though, with the shift of judges in the federal courts and the shift of the Supreme Court and the membership of the Supreme Court is all of those courts making far more right-wing decisions that are not defendant-friendly, that are not Constitution-friendly. Of course, a corporation is now a human being, a person according to the U.S. Supreme Court, but not the human beings who actually were born and are living in terms of the rights that they need to have honored. So it's really, it's getting pretty skewed that way, but it's more in terms of Supreme Court decisions and federal court decisions than federal legislation.
So, one more question before we leave our panelists for their final thoughts.
Hi, my name is Felix. I run Leaders Against Systemic Injustice here, and I also have a question for you. Sorry. You did a lot of defense work in your practice, and I want to ask, I'm currently writing a thesis on accountability in the courts, and I wanted to know your thoughts on how prosecutors can be held accountable for wrongful convictions. I mean, you see throughout history that the Innocence Project solely has shown that a lot of wrongful convictions have happened. This may not be a pressing issue throughout the nation, but it can turn into a pressing issue in the nation. And even if it's one person that's wrongfully convicted, that's too many. So I want to ask what your thoughts may be on what kind of avenues they can take on holding prosecutors accountable for mistakes, and if you have heard of some, where the sources might be so I can look at those as well.
I haven't heard of any. In fact, there was a program a couple of weeks ago that the Innocence Project put on about their new prosecutorial oversight program. I don't know if you're familiar with it. We can talk about it afterwards. John Thompson was put on death row in Louisiana for 14 of the 18 years that he was in prison wrongfully. He was finally released. The DA who held in secret the evidence that exonerated him was a judgment of $14 million, $1 million for every year he was on death row was secured against this prosecutor. But the Supreme Court said, you know what? No, he's immune. so he doesn't have to pay anything. That's the response to prosecutorial misconduct. I think, you know, the response should be, as John Thompson said at this program a couple of weeks ago, he said, you know, if my lawyer had stolen $5 from me, he would have gone to jail. He would have been charged and convicted for a crime. He stole 14, 18 years of my life. How does that not count? I think they should be fined. I think they should lose their jobs, and I think they should go to jail. Period.
I agree with
It's not that complicated because you can't. The system doesn't work, right? So, but of course, you know, people can't handle that, right? They can't think, oh my God, if the prosecutor does something illegal, he should actually be held accountable for it. Then at least call him out in the paper.
Right.
All right. There's a practice of not publishing the names of prosecutors who do shiesty criminal acts against criminal defendants in appellate decisions and elsewhere in the paper, so they're not publicly at least exposed for that. At least do that much. Publish their names. And you know, there's a lot of brainstorming I think that can be done. I think this is another place where families and victims of prosecutorial misconduct would have a lot of thought about what can be done, because people who've experienced it yourself probably have thought about it for a while, about how, you know, you want to fix it. And we don't want to be a vindictive system. We want to be a system that teaches the right thing and enforces the right thing and encourages good behavior. You know, back to what I said earlier, we want a system that works for everyone the same way. And so, you know, you don't get an exemption because you're a prosecutor and you can claim that you did it, you know, because it was part of your job and you made a mistake or whatever, you know, the claim that happens.
Thank you.
So I'm going to leave a minute for each panelist to say any concluding final words before we close out. And if you want to start, Will.
This is Black History Month, so let me leave you with some words from the greatest abolitionist this country has ever known. Frederick Douglass said, "Slavery has been fruitful in giving itself names. It has been called the peculiar institution of the social system and the impediment. It has been called by a great many names, and it will call itself by yet another name. You and I and you had better wait and see what new form this monster will assume, what new skin and slim will come forth next. And I'm telling you, the criminal justice system." Thank you.
I try to be as practical as possible. I think that we need to work hard. There's a lot that we need to struggle against. We need to educate ourselves, and then we need to act. And there's no excuse for not acting once you've been educated. And our plan is to die tired, and so we should. In the McCluskey decision that the Supreme Court found, despite discriminatory impact in the selection, in the prosecution selection in capital cases, because the prosecutor didn't call the black people nigger and didn't have like some other kind of smoking gun, there was no proof of intent of discrimination. And so therefore it stands. And Justice Brennan, who was one of my heroes, in dissent in that decision, a seminal decision 25 years ago this April, that ruined a lot of our possibilities of challenge of race discrimination in capital prosecution. He said, what the majority here today in writing this opinion and issuing this decision fears is too much justice. And we can't let that happen. We can't, justice has got to rule. It can't be what they fear and then they don't institute. So do what you can. Thank you.
I just want to say that the cost of justice, as we heard, comes from price for this money that normally costs more than any of us can afford to pay. All the human life and human sacrifices that we've seen from families going through the process with their loved ones. And I want to say that the final word for us as citizens should be to stop the death penalty, should be to say no, and not the judicial system decisions that override ours. And it starts with us from who we vote in office, who